So AFC East, let's start with the Buffalo Bills, Sam. And I know this is one of your favorite teams to watch this year just because of how they handled the wide receiver position this offseason. Stephon Diggs is out. Buffalo Bills, and it's not just Diggs. Like, it's a lot of, younger players getting ready to fill in bigger roles. A lot of veteran turnover here for the Buffalo Bills. Trying to answer that eternal question, when do they get over the hump? Can they get over the hump with Josh Allen, get to the Super Bowl, bring Buffalo that championship? So what are your high-level thoughts on the Bills heading into 2024?
Well, even just that juxtaposition, right? Like the overall dynamic of Buffalo is, can they get over the hump? Can they win that final playoff game? Can they get to a Super Bowl? Can they win a Super Bowl? How do they match the Chiefs, right? And that butted up against trading away your number one wide receiver, effectively. Like, those are usually not two things that go together. Usually you're trying to trade for a number one wide receiver if you're trying to get over the hump and, add one more player to change the whole outcome and the end result of a team that's been close but hasn't managed to really get there. Buffalo went in the opposite direction, and with the way his contract was arranged, it didn't seem like that was always a plan, right? This was not something that had been necessarily coming down the pipe, and they knew that they were going to move on from Diggs in this way in this time. This was something that seems to have okay, the Diggs thing has become too big of a pain. Let's move him on. And the deal that they got, neither was that so good that you can say, okay, they weren't planning on it, but the deal on the table was too good to turn down. It changed the whole dynamic. They effectively decided this offseason that, you know what? The cryptic tweets, the sort of acting angry, whatever it is, the Diggs thing is just more of a pain than it's worth, and we're going to get rid of him without a real plan to fix it or to replace him, and we're just going to make the best of a bad situation. So they ship him off. The Texans rework his deal. He's there now, and now Buffalo has this mismatch of weapons at wide receiver, and somebody has got to try and replace Stephon Diggs, or do the Brandon Bean thing and... No, wait, Billy Bean. Which Bean? The TV,
Billy.
The movie Bean. They've got to replace him in the aggregate, right? They've got to find a collection of wide receivers that can replace Stephon Diggs, even if none of them is necessarily going to be that number one X wide receiver that can win consistently from that alignment.
Yeah, adding to the intrigue in the draft, there was 4 wide receivers off the board, and the Bills were ready to pick wide receiver 5. Of course, they're going to fill their biggest need. And they traded down, and a few other receivers go off the board, and they finally get Keon Coleman, who might, again, one of the bigger storylines in the entire NFL, because are they expecting him to be Diggs-like? Are they expecting him to play the X and be that go-to guy? Or the other group of receivers that they have now, it's an intriguing group because of how they play, skill set-wise. A lot of yak-heavy type of players. Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, then some outside receivers, Mac Hollins and Marquez Valdez-Scantling, adding different dynamics, maybe on the outside as vertical threats, and then back to the yak guys at tight end, particularly Dalton Kincaid, who's basically a big slot receiver. So, is that mix enough? When again the North Star here is the Chiefs. We're trying to compete with the Chiefs. We're trying to beat the Chiefs, not in the regular season, because the Bills can do that. They've showed that in the playoffs. Can they beat the Chiefs in the playoffs? How does this receiver group end up shaking out here for the Bills?
Yeah, and obviously when you have Josh Allen as your quarterback, fundamentally it's all going to work-ish. Josh Allen's good. He's going to drag pretty much anybody to a respectability, to a good position. But it's a different grading curve when you're trying to get over the hump, when you're trying to match Kansas City. And it's can this offense actually function with what looks like a missing skill set in terms of that Stephon Diggs replacement, that X guy? And the players that have the most ready-made skill set for that, they're all being talked about as roster bubble guys rather than, real difference makers so far this preseason. Mac Hollins is a big outside receiver that could potentially do that. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, okay, he's been inconsistent at this level, but he's big, he's fast, he can win outside, he can win vertically. Valdez-Scantling has been talked about somebody who might not make the roster. They're still signing wide receivers. Demir Bird came in.
As of the time you hear this, they might be off the roster. Who knows?
Right, exactly.
Disclaimer.
So this whole dynamic is a group of unknown receivers or proven commodities that just don't fit that role. And how is the whole thing going to work together? And ultimately, I think we may end up in a situation where the offense just has to shift away from that type of guy, and it becomes more of a slot heavy system. It becomes a two tight end offense. It becomes a system that's working horizontally rather than vertically. And that itself just becomes an interesting dynamic to watch. Like, how does Josh Allen change his game to accommodate what is just a very different group than they've had the last couple of years with Diggs and Gabe Davis? It's just a pivot from this entire system.
So Joe Brady takes over last year, and the offense looked different. And, the hardcore numbers, the EPA maybe wasn't better, but they won more games. The defense played better, and, to correspond with the offense. And they ran the ball more, right? They had games like against Dallas where Josh Allen, who's an MVP candidate, almost didn't have to throw the ball at all. And they just ran the ball like crazy. And I wonder how much that is a part of the strategy this year as well. And it feels like for the last 3 years, Sam, you and I in our preview shows would say, is this the year they're trying to take some of, the Josh Allen, take some stuff off his plate. They're trying to, ease the burden a little bit. Well, Joe Brady ran Josh Allen more than ever. Now, is that because every game was basically a playoff game, or they were 5-5 at one point last year? Is that why? Or are they really going to try to run the ball a little bit more, run the clock a little bit more, protect the defense a bit more, and also be a little less explosive because you lose a Stephon Diggs? So I think they have some answers, to replace Diggs and still create a lot of offense. At the end of the day, though, they still probably need Josh Allen to be superhuman and just hope, a couple of those misses, a couple of those plays where they just miss against the Chiefs in the playoffs, just, go their way this time.
Well, it feels like they need that more than ever, right? The last couple of years have been about trying to actually scale back how much they need Josh Allen to be Superman. And maybe let's only tap into that when we need it. And now, without Diggs, without Gabe Davis, with this sort of unknown element of the receiver core generally, it's like, actually, now we need Josh Allen to do that more than ever. We actually need to tap into that at all times because he's the one that's going to have to figure out how to make it all work.
Yeah, so I'm intrigued by what this offense looks like, and just here's the story for me in Buffalo overall. Something you don't always see. It's a full youth movement. They've had injuries the last couple of years, so some of these players have, come in and performed well, but there's no more Mitch Morse at center. You no longer go into the season and it's Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde at safety, and you just know that we have these veterans. There's no more Tre'Davious White at corner. So again, there's been injuries. These guys have been in and out of the lineup the last few years, but they were cornerstone type of players. In addition to Diggs, who we've talked about a bunch, they're no longer cornerstone players to build upon. It's a younger roster where they're relying on guys who have primarily been backups to carry the squad now and to be the guys. This used to happen in the NFL more. Back when the salary cap was harder to manipulate and you lose all your veterans and you bring in the young guys and you go, the Bills seemed like they opted into this and they said, all right, no more pushing the credit card. It's a bit of a roster reset, but the Chiefs did a roster reset a couple years ago and won a Super Bowl, right? So is that what they're banking on, that we can churn the roster a little bit, get younger, and still compete? And do you think they are able to do that this season in Buffalo?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, I think it's just the inevitability of having a quarterback on a big money contract. Eventually you end up with one of these years where you have a little bit more turnover and a little bit more change than you would like ordinarily, but that's just the nature of the contracts, right? Some guys are going to come up at the same time. Ideally, you try and stagger that. You try and make sure that you don't have them concentrated, but ultimately it's a negotiation, right? Sometimes you end up in an area that you're not 100, that you wouldn't do it if you didn't have to accommodate other people. If you just had to set it yourself, this is how we would set this up. So, yeah, I think Buffalo have had a little bit more turnover and a little bit more change than they would have liked this offseason, and it creates an inherently larger amount of risk than I think we've had for Buffalo for the last couple of years. There are more things to be concerned about because of all this change.
On the defensive side of the ball, Gregory Rousseau continues to get better and better every single year. He's looked almost unblockable at times during the preseason. Still wonder if they can get Von Miller back. Playing injured last year, the first year where he just didn't look anything like his previous self last year. A guy that they're paying over $19 million per year to, be that closer, be that guy that they hoped would go on a playoff run like he did for the Broncos, for the Rams. Can he bounce back? Can Ed Oliver take his game to the next level at defensive tackle? So I think some of those questions. They also have to deal with Matt Milano now being injured and maybe not coming back until the last third of the season, potentially in December at best, for Matt Milano at linebacker. So again, relying on a lot of young players on defense, but I think that also means guys like Rousseau stepping up and maybe a Von Miller, hoping that he could get back to some semblance of what he was previously.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I think this defense is a good unit. It's in solid shape. The difference, one of the moves they made to try and get over that hump and to try and win a game in the postseason that they haven't been winning was bringing in Von Miller, right? And letting him be that closer and letting him be that guy that could make the difference between beating the Chiefs or not. And then obviously Miller simply hasn't been that player for them. And it's left them in that situation. Like, who's going to be the difference maker in these critical situations? The 13 seconds left against Kansas City in the postseason. Like, who's going to make a play instead of capitulating the way that it's happened in the past? And that's the one area where you look at this defense and you say, maybe that's what they're still missing. They've got a lot of good players. They've got a lot of guys that are capable starters. But who is the guy that's going to show up and be a difference maker in the crunch time? The most likely candidates right now are Gregory Rousseau taking that step and continuing his development. Or, Rasul Douglas has been an impact playmaker, a guy that can create turnovers at cornerback. He's a little bit volatile. It's a bit hit or miss sometimes, but Douglas can make those plays. But that's still the area on defense where I think I would have the most concerns is, like, do they have enough star power in addition to the baseline, which is pretty good?
All right, best case scenario for me, for the Bills, is Josh Allen's still there. They have enough talent. They make the run. I think it's in the range of outcomes. It doesn't, if you're just looking at roster construction year to year, it doesn't feel as comfortable. The names are different, but again, most of the guys that are replacing some of the bigger names who have departed, they've at least produced before. The Christian Benfords of the world, who's coming off a pretty good season playing corner. Douglas, who you mentioned, has come in and been a really good fit for the Bills. I think they have a chance to go on the Super Bowl run. That's the best case scenario. Allen is a superstar. He has maintained that level of performance. He's volatile. Like, he'll turn it over, but he'll make 3 times as many big time throws, 3 times as many huge plays and game changing plays. Allen is perfectly fine. He's not underachieving, as some executives said this offseason. Allen is probably QB 2 or 3 in the NFL behind Mahomes. I think that a lot of us are on the same page there. I think they have everything they need to win a Super Bowl. I just think the margin for error is probably a little bit smaller compared to previous seasons.
I feel like 3 of the teams in this division have effectively the same best case and worst case scenario. And they're all Super Bowl. Like, the top end is Super Bowl for 3 of the 4 teams in this division. And it's true for Buffalo. Okay, they might have more concerns, more question marks than they've had in previous seasons, but ultimately, with Josh Allen at the helm, with the talent that they do have on board on either side of the ball, with the coaching that's there, this team can still beat anybody on a given Sunday or on a given Saturday in the postseason in January and get to a Super Bowl and or win a Super Bowl. So best case scenario for them, I think it is absolutely Super Bowl. That's within the range of outcomes. Worst case scenario, though, I think is a little bit worse than it's been. And I think worst case scenario is missing the playoffs for this team. Like, it's that the offense does not fire without a number 1 wide receiver, that they don't manage to kind of square that circle, that the losses on defense bite a little bit deeper than maybe people are expecting it to. And they, in a loaded AFC, they simply come out on the wrong side of a lot of talent and don't make it to the postseason at all.
Yeah, I mean, they've been the team in the AFC East since New England's dynasty has died. It's Buffalo. They're the team to beat in the AFC East. But I do believe this is the first year where they're a little bit more vulnerable, that the downside is a little bit riskier. Because of the depth of the AFC, right? Because of the 2 teams in the division, the Jets and the Dolphins, that are equipped to go on a run, because of the other teams in the North, the Chiefs in the West. I mean, the way the Texans have built. Buffalo has been division round or better the last 4 or 5 years. They have been on the cusp of the Super Bowl, right, or close enough in the AFC Championship. There's a chance, yeah, you're right. Either it's a first round exit, or maybe even a completely disappointing season. And at the end of the year, we say, okay, that was a reset year, right? They took some chances. They lost a bunch of starters and replaced them. I do believe that is the floor is a little bit lower, we'll say, for Buffalo this year. I agree on that. How about a position or player you're watching? It's got to be Keon Coleman, right? I mean, it's one of our favorite stories of this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, it's Keon Coleman and that whole wide receiver dynamic at that position, right? Are they going to simply say to Keon Coleman, like they basically did after the draft, Keon's going to play the X, he's going to be our Stephon Diggs replacement? Nothing about his profile coming out of college suggests that that's what he should be doing. He looks like a guy that does not separate against man coverage, that operates against zones extremely well, that is better suited to be an inside big slot type of receiver. Problem is they have a bunch of big slot guys or a bunch of slot weapons already. Somebody has to play outside. So, look, if they move him around, if they're going to use him all over, cool. But if they're just going to say, go do your best Stephon Diggs impersonation, that feels like setting him up for failure, unfortunately. And if it's not going to be him, who else is it going to be on this roster? Just figuring out how this whole wide receiver group unfolds for Buffalo is the thing to watch.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. That's it's one of the biggest keys of the season for any team, really, in fun for us to watch because it was an off-season storyline. You get rid of Diggs, how are you going to replace him? They go with Coleman, wide receiver 8 in the draft, and then you're either going to reshape your roster or your offense, or you're just going to let him go. So I agree that's the biggest key here for Buffalo.